rain was a cold, relentless curtain, washing the sign for the Shady Pines Motel into a blurred streak of neon red and yellow. Adam pulled his truck off the deserted highway, the tires crunching onto old, waterlogged gravel. It was late, just past 11 p.m., and the isolation of the place was immediate and profound. The motel was a single, long, low-slung building, looking more like a concrete bunker than a hospitality stop. Adam was there for an emergency electrical and security job. The entire grid was failing, cycling power randomly, a structural collapse that the owner couldn't afford to ignore. He found the office door open. Inside, the air was stale and thick with the smell of cheap coffee and damp polyester. The receptionist, a pale, thin man with deep rings under his eyes, looked up, his expression a mixture of profound exhaustion and tight, coiled anxiety. "Adam? The Phixer? Thank God," the receptionist whispered, his voice barely audible over the drumming rain outside. "The power keeps shorting. The cameras are useless. We need the grid stabilized immediately." Just as Adam was setting his toolkit on the counter, the front door swung open, letting in a gust of wet, freezing wind. 3 young men, loud, dressed in matching college sweatshirts and oblivious to the atmosphere, burst in, laughing and shaking water from their hair. They were traveling, treating the motel like a late-night joke. The receptionist's anxiety spiked visibly. His eyes darted nervously between the 3 men and Adam. "We need a room," the loudest one announced, slamming a credit card onto the counter. "Best available. We're passing through." The receptionist processed the transaction, his hands trembling slightly. He handed the plastic key cards over, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, almost desperate whisper. "Listen to me, boys. You keep to your room, do not wander, and stay away from 309, he warned him, his eyes pleading with them. "Do not go near that room." The young men scoffed, laughing off the odd warning as small-town eccentricity. They grabbed their cheap bags and disappeared down the long, dim corridor leading to the rooms. Adam looked at the receptionist. "What was that about room 309? Structural damage?" The receptionist shook his head slowly, his eyes wide and dark. "Not structural, Adam. Just don't go near it. I don't get paid enough to talk about it. Please, the breaker box is down that hallway, near the ice machine. Just fix the power and leave." Adam felt the familiar prickle of professional curiosity overriding common sense. A structural flaw he could fix was one thing. A warning about a closed door was another. He ignored the receptionist's pleas. He picked up his tools and walked down the cold, silent corridor, the air heavy with rising dread. The numbers painted on the doors grew steadily larger. 301, 303, 305. He was heading straight toward the power failure, and straight toward 309. Adam located the central breaker box, a corroded steel cabinet recessed into the wall near the ice machine. He flipped the panel open, the strong light from his headlamp revealing a terrifying tangle of burned-out switches and frayed wires. The scale of the electrical failure was worse than the blueprints suggested. He strapped himself in, pulling on heavy insulated gloves, ignoring the intense silence of the late-night motel. He had just isolated the main power feed when the silence shattered. It wasn't a mechanical sound or a breaker shorting. It was a single, immense, violent slamming sound that echoed down the long corridor. The sound of something heavy and solid being thrown with destructive force against drywall. The impact was terrifyingly loud, seeming to originate from the far end of the hallway. Immediately following the sound, the weak, buzzing fluorescent lights in Adam's section of the corridor, the 300 block, snapped into absolute blackness. The sudden loss of light was total and disorienting. The entire wing was plunged into suffocating darkness, leaving Adam reliant on his headlamp's focused beam. Adam froze, listening to the heavy, unnatural silence that followed the impact and the failure. The power loss was directly linked to the slamming sound. Then, the true structural failure revealed itself. Down the corridor, at the very end of the lightless hall, was room 309. The door, a solid, cheap veneer slab, was slowly, laboriously forced open. It didn't swing outward on hinges, it seemed to be pushed open by a sustained, invisible pressure, groaning loudly in protest against the frame. As the door widened, a chilling, unnatural light spilled out into the black corridor. It was not electric light. It was a sickly, pale, shimmering, greenish-yellow light that pulsed with a deep, mesmerizing energy, illuminating the dust motes in the air with spectral intensity. The light itself seemed terrifyingly wrong. The sound of the open door, the unnatural light, and the preceding slam proved too much for the silence. The doors to the adjacent rooms, 301, 303, and 307, flew open, bursting out from sleep. They were shirtless, disoriented, and momentarily blinded by the sudden blackness. What the hell was that crash? The power's out!
But their confusion instantly gave way to pure, collective terror, as their eyes fixed on the horrifying, pulsing, greenish-yellow glow emanating from the open door of room 309 at the end of the corridor. The light seemed to beckon, its very color an aggressive violation of reality. They hadn't believed the warning. Now they were facing the proof. Adam was pinned between the shattered breaker box and the terrified, stumbling victims of the motel's dark secret. Adam, concealed by the darkness near the breaker box, watched the three young men, now sober and rigid with terror, stumble toward the glowing doorway. Their initial confusion had solidified into a morbid, irresistible curiosity about the source of the unnatural light. "Go check it out, man! What is that light?" One of them, the loudest one, whispered, his voice trembling uncontrollably. "You go," another snapped back. But they moved forward as a unit, drawn by the pulsing, sickly green-yellow glow emanating from room 309. Adam remained fixed in the darkness, a silent witness to the structural failure of their reality. The three men reached the open door, their silhouettes briefly blocking the eerie light. They hesitated for a moment. Then, driven by the fatal urge to know, they vanished inside the room. Adam moved cautiously to the edge of the lightless corridor. The glow from 309 revealed that the room was completely bare. No furniture, no bed, just peeling wallpaper and the bare concrete floor. The source of the light was a small, ancient-looking wooden box resting in the center of the room. It glowed with a sickening energy. One of the young men let out a sharp, choked gasp, followed by a curse. They were examining the box. It wasn't empty. It was filled to the brim with hundreds of old, brittle Polaroid photos. The light wasn't coming from the box itself, but from the cumulative energy trapped within the pictures. "What is this? Some kind of weird art project?" one asked, attempting to sound tough. "No, look at the backs," another whispered, his voice cracking. Each photo had a meticulous date and time stamped on the reverse. The subjects of the photographs were all different people, but the images were chillingly similar. Each photo was a clear, perfect snapshot of the moment of a person's violent death. A car crash, a fall, a sudden attack, frozen, specific final moments. The horror in the room intensified. The young men began flipping through the photos faster, a frantic search for context, until one of them pulled out a picture and let out a strangled, agonizing sound. "My jacket! That's my jacket! Look at the date!" he screamed, dropping the photo. The picture was a clear shot of a figure, him, slipping on a wet floor, his neck twisted at an impossible angle. The timestamp matched the current date, just 2 hours from now. The third friend immediately snatched up the remaining photos, dealing out the rest of the devastating truth. He found his own picture next, a terrifying flashlit image of himself slumped against a car wheel, his eyes wide open in the final moment of impact. The timestamp was identical to the first. They had stumbled into a personalized gallery of their own doom. The young men were paralyzed, their initial terror transformed into the crushing, inescapable dread of realized fate. Then the final friend, the one who hadn't spoken, held up his remaining photo, a blank white Polaroid. It was the only one that hadn't been developed. He stared at the blank picture, then at his two terrified, soon-to-be dead friends, his face a mask of profound, complex horror. He realized the terrifying implication. He wasn't photographed because his fate wasn't sealed yet. He was the intended survivor, the one left to carry the psychological burden of witnessing the structural failure. The silence returned, but it was charged with the high-frequency panic of three young men trapped between a blank Polaroid and the imminent time of their death.
The silence in room 309 was thick with the high-frequency trauma of impending death. Two young men stared at their photographic doom, and the third stared at his blank reprieve. Adam, watching from the dark corridor, knew the structural failure had reached its inevitable violent conclusion. The sickly greenish-yellow light emanating from the box intensified, pulsing faster. From the deepest shadow near the far corner of the bare room, a figure materialized. It didn't walk, it simply formed, a tall, unnaturally slender female entity. She was initially cloaked in shadow, but as she stepped into the glow of the Polaroid box, her features became sickeningly clear. She was ancient, gaunt, yet her eyes, dark, magnetic pools, radiated a terrible, focused intelligence. She wasn't a ghost, she was the architect of the structural failure, a sorceress bound to the timeline of death. Her human facade lasted only a heartbeat. Her form began to violently distort, the skin rapidly blackened and desiccated, pulling taut over the bone. Her mouth stretched into a wide, soundless rictus, and her hands elongated, the fingers ending in sharp, pointed talons. She became a terrifying, monochromatic, demonic presence, fueled by the energy of the recorded deaths. The two young men who held their death photos screamed, a unified, high-pitched wail of final, absolute terror. The entity ignored the third survivor. Her attack was focused, efficient, and horrifically swift. She did not touch them. She simply raised both her hands, palms open toward the victims, and released an immense, silent wave of kinetic energy.
The effect was instantaneous. The first young man, holding his snapshot of the car crash, was seized by the invisible force. He was violently hurled backward across the concrete room, slamming into the far wall with a wet, bone-jarring impact. He slid down the wall, utterly silent, his head lolling at an unnatural angle. He was lifeless. The demonic entity turned its blazing black gaze to the second victim, who was paralyzed, still clutching the photo of his fall. The spirit launched a second, brutal, silent assault. The young man's body convulsed violently, his eyes rolling back in their sockets, and he collapsed forward, hitting the concrete floor with a final, heavy thud. He lay still, the photographic prophecy fulfilled with terrifying precision. Adam, watching from the darkness, was locked in place. He wanted to scream, to run, to intervene, but his muscles had seized up in complete, primal terror. The sheer, non-physical efficiency of the kills, the lack of blood, the total silence of the trauma was a level of horror that transcended anything he had ever dealt with. He was a witness to an active, calculated spiritual execution. The demonic entity lowered her hands. The room was silent, save for the ragged, choking breathing of the one survivor, the young man who held the blank Polaroid. The sorceress had done her work, eliminating the marked souls and leaving the single witness to the structural failure of the motel. The silence in the corridor was absolute, broken only by the thin, rattling gasps of the remaining survivor inside room 309. The demonic entity, having completed her task, did not linger. The sickening green-yellow glow from the Polaroid box intensified once more, and the towering figure of the sorceress dissolved instantly, pulling back into the absolute darkness of the room's far corner. She was gone, leaving only the two fresh bodies as terrible evidence. Adam's paralysis snapped, replaced by a surge of pure, adrenaline-fueled action. He was no longer a frozen witness, he was the Phixer, responding to a catastrophic system failure with desperate physical intervention. He sprinted down the black corridor toward the glowing doorway. The air near room 309 was thick with a residue of cold, acrid energy. He forced himself through the doorway, ignoring the horror of the two lifeless forms scattered on the concrete floor. The third young man, the intended survivor, was huddled against the wall, his body shaking uncontrollably, his eyes wide and vacant from psychological shock. He was alive, but barely anchored to reality. He still clutched the blank Polaroid, his mind utterly shattered. "We have to move, now!" Adam yelled, grabbing the survivor by the collar of his shirt. The young man was limp, unresponsive, a dead weight of terror. Adam didn't have time for comfort or explanation. He hauled the limp body over his shoulder. He staggered backward out of the terrifying glow of room 309 and into the suffocating darkness of the corridor. The two fresh bodies remained illuminated by the sickly green light, their fates sealed. Adam moved as fast as he could, hauling the survivor's heavy weight toward the main lobby staircase.
The stairs were a desperate climb, his legs screaming in protest. As he reached the top landing, he felt the cold energy of the sorceress return, a slight, chilling shift in the air pressure behind him, signaling that she was already reforming, preparing to reclaim her witness. He reached the relative warmth and light of the lobby. He dumped the survivor unceremoniously behind the reception desk, near the terrified receptionist who had warned him. "Call 911! Police! Get them here now!" Adam roared, pulling his own phone out. Miraculously, the signal, which had been dead all night, flickered back to life, grasping onto a single stubborn bar. Adam bypassed the police, knowing the time delay would be too great. He found the speed dial for the county sheriff's department and punched the number, his voice tight and urgent. "This is Adam, the Phixer. I'm at the Shady Pines Motel. 2 confirmed fatalities in room 309. Apparent homicides, but they were caused by something that is not physical. We need immediate law enforcement and specialized cleanup. Them to check the room for a wooden box and photos, and tell them to bring backup." He disconnected the call, glancing over the counter at the survivor, who was now curling into a fetal position, still clutching the white Polaroid. The receptionist was staring at the crumpled body in mute horror. Adam knew the sorceress was coming. He couldn't wait for the sheriff. He had to get his truck and his witness out of the structural failure zone. Adam stood guard by the front door, the ringing echo of his police call fading from the static-ridden phone. He kept one eye on the severely traumatized survivor huddled behind the counter, and the other on the corridor, waiting for the return of the cold energy. The receptionist, pale and shaking, was useless, muttering prayers under his breath. The response was immediate and overwhelming, surprisingly fast for the remote location. Within 5 minutes, the silence was shattered by the shriek of sirens and the blinding, flashing light of multiple squad cars flooding the motel parking lot. Uniformed officers and a detective burst through the office door, their hands instinctively resting on their holsters, reacting to Adam's frantic report.
"Where are the victims? Where is the shooter?" The lead detective, a stocky woman named Reyes, demanded, her eyes scanning the empty lobby. "No shooter, detective," Adam stated quickly, pointing down the dark corridor. 2 fatalities in room 309. Severe, non-physical trauma. It was an entity, a sorceress. The evidence is inside the room. This man, Adam gestured to the survivor, is the only witness. He's in shock. Detective Reyes's skepticism was immediate and absolute. She shared a disbelieving glance with her partner. "Let's stick to the facts, Adam. Homicide or not, we follow protocol. Secure the scene." Several officers surrounded the entrance to the 300 block, their flashlights cutting sharp, defensive beams through the corridor's darkness. They moved cautiously, rifles raised, proceeding toward the infamous room 309. Adam waited, his breath catching in his throat. The proof was about to be confirmed. The police would see the bodies, the Polaroid box, and the terrifying evidence of the supernatural execution. The officers reached room 309. The door, which Adam had left gaping open, was now oddly closed, though unlocked. The sickly greenish-yellow light was gone. "Clear the room," Detective Reyes ordered, her voice tight with caution. With a final shove, the officers forced the door inward. Their rifles swept the interior, expecting gore, expecting trauma. What they found was a terrifying, absolute nothing. The room was spotlessly clean, perfectly normal. There was a simple double bed, neatly made with standard motel linens. The walls were painted a neutral cream. The concrete floor was covered entirely by a cheap beige carpet. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, no overturned furniture, no debris. The 2 bodies that had collapsed so violently moments ago had vanished entirely. Most chillingly, the wooden box filled with hundreds of murderous Polaroid photos was nowhere to be seen. The officers emerged from the room, their faces etched not with fear, but with profound professional confusion. "Detective Reyes," the lead officer reported, his voice flat. "The room is clean, empty. No signs of forced entry, no bodies, and 0 signs of violence. It looks like a standard rental." Reyes turned slowly, her gaze freezing on Adam, hardening into suspicion. She walked back to the lobby, her anger palpable. The structural failure had masked itself entirely, leaving behind only the hysterical contractor and the silent, broken witness. Detective Reyes advanced on Adam, her voice dangerously low. "2 bodies, Adam. You called us out for a double homicide, and we find a perfectly made bed. You better start telling me where your victims went, or we're moving from skeptical to obstruction." Adam stood his ground, pointing at the shivering receptionist behind the counter. "Ask him. He warned us about 309. He knew something was wrong." Reyes turned her attention to the receptionist, whose nameplate read J. Miller. Miller didn't look at Reyes. His eyes were locked on the empty corridor,
the remnants of the night's terror still visible in his profound exhaustion. He finally cracked. It's the room. It's always been the room. This motel isn't cursed by accident. It was built over the wrong place. He started to confess the motel's local dark history, the shame evident in every tight syllable. Decades ago, before this was the Shady Pines, the land was owned by an old couple. They weren't normal. They performed rituals, black magic. They used that exact spot, where 309 is now, for their practices. They died in that room violently, decades apart. The owner, my father, bought the land cheap and tried to build over it, hoping the structure would contain the evil. He pointed a trembling finger down the corridor. That room was never supposed to be rented. It was supposed to be sealed off. The power failures, the shorting cameras, that's the entity feeding off the power grid. And the woman Adam saw, the demon, that's the spirit of the sorceress trapped in the room's dimensional weakness. Detective Reyes listened to the frantic confession with an expression of cold professional disbelief. So, you're telling me you own a motel built on a vortex of black magic, and the killer is a sorceress spirit that uses Polaroids? Miller, this is a waste of city resources. Your contractor suffered a mental break, and you're covering it with folklore. Adam interrupted, forcing the physical evidence back into the conversation. The power failure was real, Detective. The power went out right before the attack. The structural flaw is the room itself. It exists outside of normal time. Reyes looked at the traumatized survivor, who could only rock back and forth clutching his blank Polaroid. She looked at the frantic contractor, claiming demonic intervention. And she looked at Miller, who was confessing to owning a cursed property. She knew she had no evidence, no bodies, and a story that defied every logical police report. She was trapped between professional duty and a horrifying, unbelievable truth. Detective Reyes made her final decision, a choice rooted in protocol and the lack of physical evidence. She couldn't process spirits or time-locked murder loops. Miller, we are filing this as an unsubstantiated report involving severe psychological distress. You will clean up this mess and cooperate with health services regarding the unsafe environment. She gave Adam a final, hard look, a look that labeled him as delusional. You're lucky the power was out, Adam, otherwise I'd charge you with filing a false report. Get medical attention. Your friend needs immediate psychological care. The police packed up swiftly, the flashing lights retreating down the rain-slicked highway. The entire incident was erased from the physical record, filed away as a momentary structural failure of the human mind, not the motel's infrastructure. The lone survivor, still clutching the blank Polaroid, was carefully loaded into an ambulance. He was silent, unresponsive, his mind irrevocably shattered by the minute he spent in room 309. Adam watched him go, knowing the true horror, that the survivor's photo remained blank because his fate was now worse than death. It was living with the knowledge of absolute evil. Adam was left alone. He walked back to the breaker box, the stillness of the corridor now heavy with the psychic residue of the sorceress. He worked in complete silence, methodically replacing the blown components and rerouting the main lines. He fixed the structural fault in the wiring, restoring the power grid to perfect function. The fluorescent lights now hummed steadily, their bright, clinical glow serving as a desperate denial of the dark, temporal weakness that lay just feet away. He knew the truth. The room was clean because the sorceress had the power not just to kill, but to sanitize the evidence, pulling the bodies and the prophetic tools back into the temporal loop of her own dimension. The motel was a trap, and room 309 was the mechanism. He collected his tools, his movements slow and deliberate. He looked at the closed door of 309, now just another identical brown door in the long hallway, and felt the chilling weight of the historical evil that lay dormant within. He hadn't fixed the structural problem. He had merely rearmed the system. Adam walked out, leaving the fully functional grid and the utterly defeated owner, Jay Miller, behind. He climbed into his truck, the cold rain still falling softly. He had walked away from mansions, bunkers, and ghost trains. But this horror, the horror of seeing inescapable fate documented on film, would never leave him. He carried the indelible knowledge of the structural flaw that lay beneath the mundane surface of reality. That motel is still out there, hiding room 309. If I gave you the key, would you dare go back? Tell me in the comments, should the Phixer ever return to room 309?